Why did countries like Greece and Portugal need bailouts, while Italy and Belgium, despite huge debt, managed to avoid them? Simple. Because not all debt is dangerous in the same way. A country can have a lot of debt and still survive. What kills you is not always the size, it's who owns it. If your debt is funded internally by your own banks, your own institutions, and your own savers, it's harder for the market to suddenly run. If you rely too much on foreign capital that can leave, when they leave, your whole system can crack. Now, the mistake most people make is they see a country with 100%, 120%, 130% debt to GDP and think, finished, doomed, it has to blow up. Not necessarily. Debt crises are not just about how much debt you have, they are also about funding structure. Who is lending to you, in what currency, for how long, and how likely are they to panic? Italy is the perfect example. It had massive debt, and it still does, but a lot of that debt was in domestic currency, under domestic law and held by residents and domestic institution, and that matters a lot. If your own banks, pension funds, insurers, households and institutions hold your government debt, you have a built-in cushion. They are not as quick to dump everything overnight. They are embedded in the same system. Their survival is tied to the country. That does not make debt safe forever, but it makes it less fragile in a panic. Foreign capital is different. Foreign investors can leave. They do not care about the national stability. They care about risk-adjusted return. The moment confidence breaks, they hit the exit button. And if a country needs those investors to keep funding itself, the spiral gets ugly very quickly. And that is one reason Italy and Belgium were different from the bailout countries. They had heavier local absorption capacity. Italy is the clearest case. According to the IMF, Italy's public debt is predominantly in domestic currency and the majority is owned by residents, with about a quarter held by the Bank of Italy in recent years. That structure matters because it reduces classic external funding risk. It also means Italy was not just some fragile borrower begging foreign money to stay another week. It had a deep domestic market, a big savings base, a local investor class that could keep buying, and there was another reason Italy was different. It was too big. Italy was not Greece. It was the Eurozone's third largest economy. If Italy had fully blown up, the whole Euro project was in real danger. So markets knew this was not a normal company to test forever. Now, Belgium is also a really interesting case because it had very high debt and political dysfunction. At one point, it went a very long time without a formal government, and that should have been a disaster, but it still avoided a sovereign bailout. Why? Because Belgium had a mature domestic financial system, a credible debt management setup, and a funding base that was not purely dependent on nervous foreign money. And that gave it more room. Now, Belgium absolutely had stress. Dexia had to be rescued in October 2011, so this was not some perfect clean success story, but the state itself did not become the next Greece. And that tells you something important. A country with local funding depth can absorb stress differently. The real phrase here is run risk. Can investors run on you fast enough to break the system? If a country relies heavily on foreign funding, the answer is much more likely to be yes. If a country's debt is domestically anchored, the answer is often slower, messier, and less catastrophic. And that buys time. And time matters in a debt crisis. Time lets governments refinance. Time lets central banks step in. Time lets politics catch up. And time lets panic cool down. Italy and Belgium were not invincible. They were just less vulnerable to instant capital flight than the weaker peripheral cases. Now, let's be honest. Domestic funding alone did not save them. The ECB mattered massively. On July 2012, Mario Draghi said the ECB would do whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And that was the turning point. Shortly after, the ECB announced OMT. It never even had to use it. The signal alone changed the market. Why? Because once investors believed the Eurozone would not just let sovereign spreads spiral forever, the panic eased. So yes, local debt ownership helped countries like Italy and Belgium survive the storm, but the central bank backstop is what stopped the storm turning into total collapse. So why did Italy and Belgium avoid sovereign debt bailouts? Not because debt does not matter, and not because they were flawless. They avoided bailout because their debt was more self-contained, their domestic systems could absorb more pressure, and they were less exposed to the kind of foreign capital flight that destroys fragile states. Then the ECB came in and shut the panic down. That's the lesson. In a debt crisis, the most dangerous thing is not having too much debt, it's needing the wrong people to keep funding it.